Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in October. I read mostly horror, including quite a few kids and YA books, which was really fun, and also I read one true crime book. First up is a book I actually finished right at the end of September but didn't talk about in my September wrap-up. It is The Yearbook by Peter Lerangis. This is part of the Point Horror series from the 90s, and I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars out of 5. This one follows David and some strange things that are going on in his school, and it's actually a really clever story. There are a lot of interesting elements to it, so there's kind of a mystery aspect, and then there's also, if you might guess from the cover, a Lovecraftian element. And it was really good fun. David's voice is really enjoyable to read. There are a couple of moments when he's kind of leching over this girl, which was not cool, but other than that, he had a really enjoyable voice to read from, had a really dry, sarcastic sense of humour, so that was fun. And yeah, the story was great, very entertaining. I rated it 4 stars. Then I kicked off October with More Tales for the Midnight Hour by J.B. Stamper. This is a collection of 13 short stories aimed at younger readers, and this one was brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed this one too. It had a really great variety of types of stories. Another thing I liked about this was that even though the stories are aimed at children, they're not too childish, so even reading it for the first time as an adult, it was a really great read. So yeah, 4 stars. Then I had another 4-star read, so yeah, the month was going well so far, and this was The Devil's End by D.A. Fowler, and I already have a separate review video for this as part of my Nightmare Queens series, so I'll link that below if you want to go check it out. So I won't say too much about it here, but it was a ton of fun, really entertaining. It's witty and it gets kind of gross, and yeah, it was just a really great read, and it's set around Halloween, so this was the perfect time of year to read it. Next up, I read a Choose Your Own Adventure book. This is Ghost Hunter by Edward Packard, and I loved the Choose Your Own Adventure books when I was a kid, and even though I didn't have this one in particular, there was still that nostalgic element around it. It's about a character who is trying to start a ghost hunting business, and of course you go through the story making decisions, and I died several times and I had successful endings several times. Some of them ended up being supernatural and some were not. But yeah, so it was a fun mix and an enjoyable read, and I rated it 3.5 stars. Next up, I read Hex by Thomas Olde Heuvelt. This is translated from the Dutch by Nancy Forrest Flyer, and this is a modern day horror novel set in a town called Black Spring, and there is a centuries-old witch who haunts the town, and all of the townsfolk have to try and keep that a secret from the rest of the world because she is not to be messed with. So they have a lot of strict rules in place, and a group of teenagers living in the town decide that enough is enough, and they want to post about the witch online and let the world know what is going on. This one was quite good. I rated it 3 stars. It was a mixed bag for me, quite honestly. It took me quite a while to get into it. I really wasn't enjoying it to begin with, but I did get into it after a while, and there were some things I did really enjoy about it. It certainly had its moments. I thought it did a good job with the tension and the action, but I never really connected with any of the characters, so I didn't really get fully invested in their story. Towards the end, I felt it got a bit messy. There are definitely some loose ends and questions that might be frustrating to some that aren't answered. Some of it I actually felt was contradictory as well, and yeah, overall I liked it but I didn't love it, and I rated it 3 out of 5. I did read this as a read-along, which I co-hosted with my friend Kate on Instagram. I will leave her linked below in the description. and the read along was a lot of fun. We actually had quite a lot of people join in, which was really awesome, so thank you to everyone who did join in. It was really great to be able to discuss it with other people. I know some people really loved the book, some people had mixed feelings like me, so yeah, it was a really good time for the read along, and I'm glad I read it. So the read along was great and the book was good. Like I say, it was a mixed experience for me. I think it had some really great moments, but overall it was just a bit too messy for me to really enjoy it. Next up is this anthology, October Dreams, a celebration of Halloween, edited by Richard Chizmar and Robert Morrish. And I didn't read this whole thing in October. I had read about a third of it last October, and I ended up reading about another third of it this October. So yeah, I still have some to get through, and I think I'm probably going to leave that last third till next October. This is such an excellent read, and I really enjoyed reading it during the month of October. It is a combination of short stories by various different authors, and also Halloween memories from some of the authors. So real stories from their lives, you know, whether it be their childhood or adulthood related to Halloween. So it's a really interesting mix of fiction and non-fiction, but all surrounding Halloween. Yeah, such an excellent read, absolutely perfect one to read this time of year, and I look forward to picking it up again next year. Next up, I read a book I borrowed from the library. It's called Witch Poems. It's edited by Daisy Wallace and illustrated by Trina Schart Hyman. And this is a kid's book from the 1970s. The artwork is absolutely beautiful. I'll add in a couple of pictures here that I took. And the poems were really cool as well. This was just a quick read one afternoon, but I'm really glad I picked it up and gave it a go. It was atmospheric and witchy, obviously. And I believe there are other books like this in a series, such as monster poems and ghost poems. So yeah, I might have to track those down and check them out as well. But yeah, this one, Witch Poems, was really cool, and I rated it 4 out of 5. Next, I read a spooky middle grade book. This is Truth or Dare from the You're Invited to a Creepover series, which is by PJ Knight, which I think is a pseudonym for multiple different authors. I don't think the entire series is written by the same person, but they're all under PJ Knight's name. And this is a more recent middle grade book. I think it came out in 2011. Most of the kind of kids books I read are, you know, maybe from my era, like the 80s and 90s. So it was interesting to read a more contemporary one, and I did quite enjoy it. It's about a group of girls, and one of them, Abby, is experiencing some creepy goings on. She feels like someone is stalking her, and she's been receiving these threatening text messages from someone telling her not to date this particular boy that she has a crush on. And it was quite fun. I rated it 3 out of 5. I did want to like it more than I actually did. There was a lot of emphasis on boys and makeup, which was kind of amusing, and the spooky stuff was, of course, a bit tame to what I'm used to, but it was still a fun, cute and spooky read, and I rated it 3 out of 5. Then I read The Moorstone Sickness by Bernard Taylor. This ended up being my favourite book of the whole month. I rated it 5 stars, and I love Bernard Taylor, so I always enjoy going into a book of his that's new to me. I've only read a few of his novels so far, but I'm slowly working my way through them all. But there's always that fear when you read a book by an author you really like that, oh, maybe this one isn't going to be as good as his other ones. But no, this one definitely proved that idea wrong. It was amazing. It's about a married couple who have been living in London for some time, and they decide to move away to a village called Moorstone. There are some bad memories attached to their apartment in London, and they want somewhere that they can make a fresh start and have some peace and quiet. And initially Moorstone seems to be the perfect spot, But of course these perfect places are never what they seem, and there's something sinister going on in the village. And one thing that was really interesting about this is that you learn quite early on what this thing is, but it still totally has you hooked. You know, the finding out isn't necessarily the point of the story, but it's the journey to get to that climax and the details along the way. I thought his writing was excellent, the characters were great, and the creepy stuff was wonderful. It does draw on some elements that you will have probably read in other horror novels or seen in horror films, but it's the combination of what it does with those things that I thought was really excellent, and it had a fantastic climax and ending and some really chilling moments in this story that were absolutely fantastic. So I definitely recommend this one, 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read a graphic novel. This is volume 1 of I Luv Halloween. The art is by Benjamin Roman and the story is by Keith Giffen, and there's a blurb on the front that says crass, tasteless and brilliant, and I think that sums it up perfectly. This was recommended by Lydia over at Typical Lydia. I will leave her channel linked in the description below. Definitely go check her out. And this was a lot of fun, and again it's Halloweeny, so October was the perfect time of year to read it. And it's about this group of kids who go trick-or-treating together every Halloween. The content is definitely not for kids, so there's definitely some violence and craziness and a little bit of sexual content, and it's funny. I absolutely loved all of the banter between these characters. Overall, it was a really good time. I rated it 4 stars. And there are 3 volumes total in the series, so I'll definitely keep my eye out for the other 2. I listened to an audiobook this month as well. It's a true crime one, and it is The Search for the Green River Killer by Carlton Smith and Tomas, Guillen. And the audiobook was narrated by Keith Sellen Wright, and I really enjoyed his delivery, so I did enjoy this book overall. It's a pretty long one. I think the audio was about 17 hours long, so it took me quite a while to get through just listening to it in little bits here and there because I don't get a ton of time to listen to audiobooks. But it was a really good one. It is about the Green River Killer who murdered multiple girls and women in the Seattle area in the early 80s. And when the book originally came out, I think in the early 1990s, he hadn't been caught, so this was like an unsolved case at the time. And the audiobook did have additional content at the end to include details of when Gary Ridgway was arrested for the crimes. Yeah, I won't say too much about the story itself, but it was a very interesting read, and I think overall very well put together. It is frustrating at times because of certain things that happened during the investigation, and of course ultimately really sad and heartbreaking because of all of these victims and their families that had to go through what they went through, and the fact that he wasn't caught for such a long time that meant he could continue doing what he was doing. This was a case I only knew very little about before reading the book, so it was an interesting read, and I rated it 4 stars. And I do actually have a physical copy of this, which I picked up at a library book sale some time ago, and it says on the front, America's #1 unsolved serial murder case. So yeah, this came out before Gary Ridgway was caught. But this particular copy, when I got it home from the library book sale, it actually had a newspaper clipping from when he was caught in 2001. So that was kind of interesting. And yeah, this also has some pictures in the middle of the book of some of the people involved in investigating, and then of course pictures of all the victims. So it was good for me to have that to refer to while I was listening to the audiobook, so I could kind of put some faces to the names. And last up, I read another point horror book. This is The Cemetery by D.E. Athkins, and this is set around Halloween, so I knew I had to pick this one up in October as well. And I enjoyed this one. It's about a group of friends and some frenemies who have a Halloween party, and the most popular girl insists on them all going out to Cemetery Point. And something happens out there and not all of them survive. And it seems that something is after the remaining members of this group. And this was a good read. I definitely enjoyed the Halloween atmosphere and spookiness, and the party stuff was really fun, and all of the characters being in costumes and stuff like that. So yeah, it was enjoyable. The kind of reveal and the ending was a little bit confusing and kind of wrapped up a bit too quickly for my liking, but it was still a good read. I enjoyed it and I rated it 3.5 stars. So those were all of the books I read in October. I had a pretty good month, so definitely can't complain. I hope you all had a wonderful October too, and a very happy Halloween. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!